one of the things we wanted to talk about just collectively is looking at what it means to be AI enabled or to build a system that enables somebody else to work. My assumption was that one of the best ways to get an LLM to adhere and make it easy for somebody else to participate was to have a very solid set of conventions for architecture.
I'm going to speak in less technical terms here, but I think the key theme for, having success with coding agents and automating your engineering process is really giving those agents really a full view and a logical, organized view of what's happening in the code base. That's everything from the code base itself to where you're logging issues, to how you're detailing your pull requests. Two of them that I'll call out are the linting rules that were put in place, right? So we're using ESLint for a lot of things, but we're using it also to enforce the structure that we've put in place, the scaffolding structure, sort of the layers, the different layers and the responsibilities that each of those layers sort of fulfills in our architecture. And I think that has been super helpful because it provides it's testing some of those things immediately as you're committing code, as you're committing code, so that we don't drift too far afield from what the intent of the architecture is. And again, the more consistency that we can create there, at least from my perspective, the more efficient the coding agents are at being able to execute, whether that's in my repository, whether that's in my local dev setup or Amari's or anyone else that comes on. They're recognizing the patterns more consistently. Hey, let's make sure that the coding agents have a full view on what we are trying to do both functionally and technically with our code base. And I think ADRs are a critical sort of piece to that. And so, one of the things that we've done, again, with Jed's help to make sure that that we're enforcing that and creating consistency is we have a specific ADR skill, right? So that spells out the format that we're looking for, that spells out, what should be included, how it should be articulated, and where it lands within the repo.
I remember Jed saying, oh, I added a lint rule so that an import can't happen from this package boundary to this package. And when an LLM is working and it runs to verify that its code doesn't run afoul of that, it immediately can verify that in a deterministic way because we have a lint rule.
But what I do think really piggybacks off of or takes linting sort of to the next step is the PR review skills that we've created too, because those really, again, review in more detail, all those boundaries and the design intention for each layer. And quite frankly, we don't have the bandwidth or, we just didn't have the bandwidth or in some cases, the in-depth expertise in certain areas to perform some of those reviews competently, right?
I remember early on meeting with you and Ricky was just talking about the need to move quickly, right? You're startup founders, you're on a bootstrap budget, you want to get to staging or something, minimum viable product as quickly as possible. Having this like renaissance effect where all of these like software quality measures that were just locked in people's heads are now encoded in rules, in skills, in the repo, in the automations that we have. Now it's almost like it's a forcing function for quality and consistency that just allows you to move faster when you are a founder on a tight timeline and a tight budget and bootstrapping to try to get to minimum viable product.
These guys, Codex and Claude are outstanding, and they're extremely convincing in the plans that they put together and some of the code bases that they build, but they're not. You can't just let them run amok. That's just the reality.
We think about we want humans in the loop, but we want humans in the lead.
Observability is a big thing. Again, more broadly, that you have a very opinionated architecture and that you have verbose documentation and that engineers adhere to that, it becomes much easier to sort of spec out where gaps might be in the system. So if you're onboarding a new engineer and you're saying, okay, hey, here are some of the things we want you to focus on. You can have Claude or Codex help you articulate what that is, why it is, and point them in certain directions. I had never been able to easily onboard somebody and articulate very specifically what they would do. And even from a planning perspective, before, when we're trying to decide who we need to bring on, right? And what skills they need to have, and what's the return on the investment that we would make, right? What realistically can this person do that overlays against where our gaps and stuff are? It's made so much easier by having the architecture that we have in place, right?
Developers historically did not want to write documentation. They did not want to write lint rules. And now it's like an AI can do that really effectively if you're the human in the lead, if you're leading with intent, you're not outsourcing the thinking. And then they can become this self-reinforcing loop.
Product development teams have traditionally, or can struggle with, is really sort of organizing, scheduling the work, right? Not having a complete understanding of all the dependencies that are in play. And so again, by providing this vast view of the context, it becomes easier for the coding agents to really assist you in that, to say, okay, here's where we need to start. We're going to try to address these 4 or 5 things, these 4 or 5 new features. Here's where we need to start based on where your code base is today and the value proposition that is attached to each one of these features. Here's how I would prioritize the work here.
Now, with, like you said, with all these MCP tools or even CLI tools that they're releasing, it becomes trivial to prompt Claude and say, oh, I think there's like a bunch of issues in this epic over here. Oh, also, here's our roadmap that lives here. Here's the code in the repo. And you assemble all of that context together and you give the agent a visibility of the thing. And that, just like you said, it unlocks momentum because you can now not have to wait on assembling that.
And maybe I'm exaggerating, but almost anybody can spin up a prototype that is functional and even hosted, right? But to actually industrialize that thing, it is still not easy to do without, again, the right scaffolding, the right sort of AI implements in place for, your application architecture and your infrastructure. If you don't have any of that, to your point, again, you've shortened one piece of the timeline, but you haven't done anything to impact the other piece, right? And so what you end up from a if you don't address both, right, what you end up with is a bottleneck that exists in a different spot, right? A bottleneck that exists on the engineering side, and then you have your product team that's churning out new features and iterating on new features and coming up with new things at a pace that is unsustainable. Where you,
like, there's this huge unlock that's happening for roles where the product person is not only responsible for either product strategy or vision, they can prototype, and then you have a system that enables that to flow through into code that can auto deploy in a staging environment or a preview deploy, and then you can play with it. So you shorten the loop in time from idea to, oh, let's see how this works in the system. Let's see what the constraints are that emerge that we might not have considered. Let's get it in front of users to see what their feedback is way earlier. And the product development cycle is just that much quicker as an unlock. Goal is to unlock the outcome of more quick iterations, rapid prototyping to see what it looks like into production. But the thing that unlocks that is the time invested in the guardrails, in the constraints, in the scaffolding, in the skills, in the lint rules, and all of this stuff to facilitate. And if you don't have that, you can go fast, but you can really make a mess really quickly.